All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining us for today's event, American Rescue Plan Funding for Arts and Culture Organizations from the National Endowment for the Arts. We would like to welcome our partners from the National Endowment for the Arts and our presenting partners, the National Performance Network. My name is Caitlin Zachary, and I'm the Manager of Programs and Resources at the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. Closed captioning is available for this event, and you can access it by clicking on the closed caption icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. This event also features ASL interpretation. APAP is located in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway and the Anacostan people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I would like to pay my respect to the Piscataway and the Anacostan elders, both past and present. In addition to the Zoom platform, we are also broadcasting today's webinar on Facebook Live. During today's webinar, Zoom participants will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide comments using the Q&A and chat functions. Unfortunately, we will not be taking questions or comments via Facebook Live. If you have questions at any point during the webinar, we ask you that you submit them using the Q&A box. APAP welcomes the open exchange of ideas at our events. The views expressed by our speakers or participants are those of the speaker or participant and not necessarily of APAP. We are thrilled to have the National Endowment for the Arts here to share more about the American Rescue Plan grants. But before we do, I'd like to welcome our presenting partner for this event, the National Performance Network. It is my pleasure to introduce their president and CEO, Caitlin Strokoff. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thanks so much, Caitlin, other Caitlin. It's great to be with y'all today. This is really such a wonderful treat to present this together with APAP and with the National Endowment for the Arts. I am zooming in from the National Performance Network's headquarters in New Orleans, otherwise known as Bulbancha. We are on the ancestral lands of the Atakapa Ishak, Caddo, Chitimacha, Choctaw, Homa, Natchez, and Tunica peoples, the land of many tongues for good reason. We are really grateful for the opportunity to present with APAP and to explore ways that NPN and APAP can serve our presenting members together, and really extremely grateful to the generosity of the National Endowment for the Arts staff in making themselves available to share information about this extraordinary opportunity. Thank you, Brandon and Jenny, for your time with us today. And I'm really pleased to introduce an old friend of mine, Ra Joy, who has been doing work on behalf of arts advocacy and cultural policy for decades, and who joined the NEA as the Chief of Staff earlier this year. Thank you, Ra.
Thanks, Caitlin, and hello, everybody. My name is Ra Joy. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm proud to serve as the Chief of Staff at the National Endowment for the Arts, and I'm honored to help welcome you to today's webinar on the NEA's American Rescue Plan funds. We know that there is no pandemic recovery without culture and the performing arts, and I'd like to start by thanking our partners for today's event, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals and the National Performance Network, and both Caitlins. Thank you for your leadership and spirit of collaboration. I'm really grateful for all that you do, not just for today's session, but to build artists' power and to support the performing arts field. We know that putting an end to the pandemic means getting creative workers back to work. And before the pandemic hit, the arts and cultural sector was approaching a $1 trillion industry that directly employed over 5.2 million workers and indirectly supported millions more. Chances are, if you're zooming into today's session, you know that few areas of our economy, if any, have been hit harder by COVID-19 than the arts. Cultural organizations were among the first businesses to close their doors when the pandemic hit, and they'll be among the last to truly, fully reopen. We know in the third quarter of 2020, while the national unemployment rate was 8.5%, Musicians experienced an unemployment rate of 27.1%, actors 52.3%, and dancers and choreographers 54.6%. On March 11th, President Biden signed into law the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, the second largest stimulus package in legislative history. And we're grateful to the President and to Congress that this relief package includes resources to help arts organizations and arts workers hard hit by the pandemic. This includes $135 million for the National Endowment for the Arts. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to do a much deeper dive on the NEA's American Rescue Plan program. You'll notice that in a few of these slides, you'll see the acronym ARP, or ARP for short. I'm going to just give you a very high-level overview of the program. I want to start by focusing on the goals of the NEA's Rescue Plan initiative. First and foremost, we want to support relief and recovery efforts for arts organizations all across the country. Our goal is to help preserve jobs and assist arts organizations as they rehire and reopen. A second goal for our program is to expand access to funds for communities that have been historically underserved and underrepresented by government. You'll notice here on the left-hand side of this slide is essentially the first round of ARP funding. So as is the NEA's practice, 40% of our ARP funds were distributed on April 29th to state and regional arts agencies so that they could begin distributing funds to impacted cultural organizations in their jurisdictions. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll notice on June 23rd, the Arts Endowment announced 2 new grant programs to deploy approximately $80 million in American Rescue Plan funds. One program, which you'll hear a lot about today, is a direct grant program to nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. We also rolled out a program to support local arts agency subgranting. Next slide, please. Caitlin mentioned that we are part of the Biden-Harris administration. I think yesterday marked the 6-month anniversary of the Biden-Harris administration being in office. And over the last 6 months, we've done a lot of listening. We feel like the best way to learn is by listening. And we had an opportunity to meet with and listen to arts administrators, leaders from service organizations, including individuals represented on today's call, leaders from arts agencies, as well as creators and artists and advocates from all over the country. When we met with individuals, one of the pointed questions we asked was for feedback on the last stimulus package that the NEA rolled out, the CARES Act of 2020. And we specifically asked kind of what worked and what could be improved. And time again, there were some key themes that were conveyed to Arts Endowment staff. And one consistent theme was a call for the agency to embed fairness and equity, both in the program structure as well as in every stage of the funding lifecycle. And so one item that I want to draw your attention to is the far left-hand column of this slide with the program structure. And so there's one key distinction with the American Rescue Plan that's different from CARES, and in fact, it's different from the American Recovery and Rescue Act of 2009, and that's wider eligibility. We really want to make sure that we're opening the doors of opportunity to arts organizations that perhaps have never applied for an NEA grant in the past, or even organizations that have never applied for federal funding in the past. We wanted to make sure they were eligible for support. Another point of emphasis in our ARP program is greater flexibility. I think that's one thing that worked in CARES, is we want to make sure that the dollars are flexible for grant recipients. And so these resources are intended to help support general operating expenses, and there is no matching grant requirement. And a third distinction with this program is on an emphasis on locals. And we really value the trust and proximity that local arts agencies have in their community. We feel like investing in their capacity to subgrant is one way to make the recovery both a national effort and a bottom-up effort. We're working hard to take advantage of this application window to raise awareness about the program and help applicants navigate the application process. And we're working to embed equity in every stage of the funding lifecycle. That includes ensuring a diverse group of readers and panelists to evaluate proposals. We are committed to building relationships, whether an organization receives funding for the first time or perhaps is not selected for funding this round. We want to build relationships that are built for the long term. And we are committed to not only documenting, but sharing and building upon the lessons learned from this process. Next slide, please. So if we get this right, here's what this should mean to applicants. It should mean that nonprofits new to the Arts Endowment are encouraged to apply. We talked a little bit about the flexibility of funding. We also are working hard to create a more fully accessible experience for NEA applicants and grantee partners. We're providing language translation services and ASL support for events. We have a locals focus, really recognizing the unique role that local arts agencies play in the overall arts ecosystem. We want to invest in their capacity, and we encourage applicants to not only keep an eye on our direct grant program, but to also be mindful about ARP resources that may be available at your state and local level. And we have a robust technical assistance program. Next slide, please. So now that the guidelines are posted, our primary focus is getting dollars out the door to nonprofit theaters, museums, dance companies, symphonies, and other cultural institutions all across the country. We've designed a robust public engagement schedule, including live Q&A sessions that are held twice a week, all summer through September. We have a dedicated ARP page on the NEA's website. Every chance I get, I want to emphasize that the NEA has the most accessible and knowledgeable staff team in America. And to take a deeper dive on our ARP grant program and to introduce other members of our team, I'm very pleased to turn it over to Brandon Gride, Director of Presenting and Multidisciplinary Works at the Arts Endowment. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Ra, and thank you so much to APAP and NPN for co-hosting this meeting. I'm so excited to welcome everyone to this webinar about the NEA's American Rescue Plan Grants to Organizations program. As Ra mentioned, my name is Brandon Gride. I use he, him. I'm the NEA's Director of Presenting and Multidisciplinary Works and Artist Communities. And I'm joined today by Jenny Turman, who is the Presenting and Multidisciplinary Works and Artist Communities Specialist. And as I mentioned before, we're thrilled that you've joined us, and especially want to welcome anyone who is thinking about applying for an NEA grant for the first time. There will be a lot of questions after the presentation, or a lot of time for questions after the presentation, and there will likely be a lot of questions after the presentation. So please type any questions in the Q&A area at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as possible. We'll also share our contact information at the end of today's presentation. If you remember only one thing from this webinar, we hope it's this. We understand that applying for federal funding and managing a grant can be a significant undertaking. So we strive to ensure that all applicants receive the support they need throughout the process. We welcome the opportunity to connect with you. Next slide, please. All right, so the National Endowment for the Arts is an independent federal agency. We provide funding for the arts in all 50 states, DC, and US territories. Each year, we award thousands of grants to provide all Americans with diverse opportunities for arts participation. So please check out the grant section on our website, arts.gov, for a listing of our regular grant programs, and don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. We encourage you to learn about these other grant programs and look forward to supporting you through the grants process. The next slide, please. The American Rescue Plan is designed to fuel the nation's recovery from the devastating economic and health effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Funds allocated to the NEA in this historic legislation represent a significant commitment to the arts and a recognition of the value of the arts and culture sector to the nation's economy and recovery. Next slide, please. Rescue Plan funding is available through two separate competitive opportunities: grants to organizations, which we'll talk about today, and grants to local arts agencies for subgranting. A special note to any local arts agencies that may be tuning in: if you meet the eligibility requirements, you may apply to the Grants to Organizations program for general operating support or to the Grants to Local Arts Agencies for subgranting program, but not to both. The Grants to Organizations program will be carried out through one-time grants to eligible organizations to support their own operations. Unlike other NEA funding programs that offer project-based support, Rescue Plan funds are intended to support day-to-day business expenses or operating costs and not specific programmatic activities. And I'm sorry, if you could advance the slide as well. All right, so applicants must be nonprofit, tax-exempt 501c3 U.S. organizations, units of state or local government, or federally recognized tribal communities or tribes. Applicants may include, but are not limited to, arts organizations, local arts agencies, art service organizations, and other eligible organizations. We do not fund direct grants to individuals. The applicant organization must have completed a 3-year history of arts programming prior to August 12, 2021. For the purpose of defining eligibility, 3-year history refers to when an organization began its programming and not when it incorporated or received nonprofit tax-exempt status. Programming is not required to have taken place during consecutive years. And if your programming has been disrupted due to COVID, there are flexibilities described in the guidelines. Applicants must also be up to date with reporting requirements for any previous NEA grant. Next slide, please. We are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and fostering mutual respect for diverse beliefs and values. We intend to make awards that will impact a broad constituency. We encourage applications from a variety of eligible organizations, including organizations that serve populations that are underserved, such as those whose opportunities to experience the arts are limited by ethnicity, economics, geography, or disability, organizations with small and medium-sized budgets, organizations from rural to urban communities, and organizations that may be applying for federal support through the NEA for the first time. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jenny Turman.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, everyone. You can advance the slide as well. So organizations may submit only one application to this program. Exceptions to the one application rule are made only for parent organizations applying on behalf of one or more separately identifiable and independent components. And those independent components must be vetted and approved by NEA staff. But generally speaking, one application per organization for this program. Eligible organizations that received CARES Act funding from the NEA may apply to this program as long as there are no overlapping costs during the same grant period. Eligible local arts agencies may either apply to the Rescue Plan's grants to local arts agencies for a subgranting program or to this program for general operating support, but not both. You may apply to other NEA funding opportunities for which your organization is eligible, including grants for arts projects. That's our primary grant program. In each case, the applications cannot have any overlap in costs during the same grant period. Next slide, please. You may request a grant amount for $50,000, $100,000, or $150,000. Applications will be reviewed and considered for recommendation only at one of these requested amounts. Cost share or matching funds are not required. We encourage you to select a grant amount that is reflective of your organization's size and internal capacity. Applications will be reviewed and considered for recommendation at the requested amount only. Whichever amount you choose, keep in mind the review criteria when crafting your application to make the best case. Your application will be evaluated based on the capacity of your organization to carry out the proposal. A grant period of up to 2 years is allowed, and it may start no earlier than January 1st, 2022. Next slide, please. Rescue plan funds are intended to support day-to-day business expenses or operating costs, and not specific programmatic activities. Please read the guidelines carefully for details about what costs we can support. Support is limited to any or all of the following: salary support, full or partial, for one or more staff positions. Rescue plan funds may be used to support existing jobs, new jobs, or to restore jobs that were furloughed or eliminated due to the pandemic. Fees, stipends for artists and or contractual personnel to support the services they provide for specific activities as part of organizational operations. Artist fees or stipends should be related to work with a tangible outcome, such as performances, presentations, workshops, and or the creation of artwork. Also, facilities costs such as mortgage, principal, rent, and utilities. Also, costs associated with health and safety supplies for staff and or visitors or audiences. So for example, personal protective equipment, cleaning supplies, hand sanitizer, etc. And finally, marketing and promotion costs. One type of cost isn't preferred over another. It's up to your organization to choose which cost to include in the budget and to make the case in the application as to why they're important in relation to the review criteria. Think about where the funds may make the most impact for your organization, or fill a gap that is not currently being funded through other sources. Next slide, please. All applications are reviewed by advisory panels made up of diverse groups of citizens from around the country. Panelists will consider the review criteria of artistic excellence and artistic merit, including the proposal's significance to the mission and core work of the organization, ability to carry out the award as shown by the alignment of the budget and other resources with the goals and requirements of the ARP funding opportunity. As appropriate, potential to have an immediate impact on the arts workforce, and as appropriate, the potential to serve and or reach individuals whose opportunities to experience the arts are limited by ethnicity, economics, geography, or disability. Panel recommendations are shared with the National Council on the Arts, which then makes recommendations to the Arts Endowment's chairman. The chairman reviews the council's recommendations and makes the final decision on all grant awards. Next slide, please. All right, so more details about actually submitting the application. It's a multi-step process. So for part 1, you will submit to grants.gov. You'll submit the application for federal domestic assistance, also known as the short organization form. This is a brief form that will collect very basic information about your organization. For part 2, you'll fill out the grant application form in the NEA's applicant portal. This web form is where you'll enter the majority of your application materials. So for example, your proposal description and budget information. Grants.gov and the NEA's applicant portal are two separate online systems. Next slide, please. In order to use grants.gov, you must first obtain a DUNS number from Dun & Bradstreet and then register with the System for Award Management, also known as SAM.gov. If you're a first-time applicant, you should start this process now. Allow at least 2 weeks for your SAM.gov registration or renewal. You'll also need to ensure that your organization is registered with grants.gov. As a reminder, SAM.gov and grants.gov are federal government systems, and registration in both systems are always free. The guidelines on our website have links to these sites, as well as links to video tutorials to help you get started. NEA staff does not have internal access to SAM or grants.gov, so if you run into technical difficulties with either entity, you should reach out to them directly via telephone or email. All right, Brandon, I'll pass it back to you now.
Thank you, Jenny. And we can move on to the next slide. So because we anticipate a large number of applications for this funding opportunity, applications will be submitted in two separate groups, one for organizations with legal names beginning with A through L, versus one for organizations with legal names beginning with N through Z. The different submission windows will not affect the timing of grant review or your organization's ability to receive a grant. To determine which group applies to you, use your organization's legal name as it appears in the current IRS 501c3 status letter or in the official document that identifies your organization as a unit of state or local government, or as a federally recognized tribal community. Do not use your organization's popular name if different. If you aren't sure which group to select, read the guidelines for some helpful tips or contact us. And the next slide, please. Both the A through L group and the M through Z group will have the same Part 1 grants.gov deadline on August 12th, 2021. Part 2 deadlines for the A through L group and the M through Z group will be different. So group A through L, as you can see, we'll have the Part 1 as August 12th, 2021, and Part 2 is going to be August 19th through the 25th. Whereas M through Z will have also the Part 1 due August 12th, with Part 2 for M through Z due August 27th through September 2nd. Contact us if you're unsure which group to select. And next slide, please. Guidelines are available on our website, arts.gov. Click the menu button at the top right of the homepage and then click on Grants. And the next slide. Next, scroll down to American Rescue Plan Grants. And then next slide, please. We'll flow through these pretty fast. And then select Grants to Organizations. Next slide. And then carefully read the program description. Review the other links on the left side of the page for information such as eligibility requirements and application deadlines. If you need to reach us, click on Contacts. And next slide. To access the application instructions, go to the How to Apply page. Part 1 instructions will walk you through how to submit to grants.gov. Next, please. Part 2 instructions will walk you through how to submit to NEA's applicant portal. Click on the link to the Part 2 PDF instructions. Even if you won't have access to the applicant portal until the dates we showed you before, all of the application questions are available now in this PDF, so you can prepare your application early. The PDF includes instructions for accessing the applicant portal. Next slide, please. We encourage you to go to the applicant resources area in the guidelines. Technical assistance resources include FAQs, an application checklist, a summary of common application mistakes, a grant application form tutorial, grants.gov and sam.gov resources, instructional videos, signups for live online applicant Q&A sessions with our staff, and many other items. And please check them out. We encourage you to do so. Next slide. The FAQ section on the website covers a lot of ground, but we want to highlight just a few frequently asked questions. First, Can I apply to ARP if I have already applied for another NEA grant this year or other federal relief funds, such as shuttered venue operating grants or PPP? And the answer is yes, you can. However, it's important to remember that you cannot use multiple federal grants to fund the same activities or costs. Each grant should be funding something different. Additionally, you can't use ARP or other federal funds in order to meet the matching requirements of other NEA grant programs, such as grants for arts projects. Are work samples required for ARP applications? No, you will not be required to submit work samples or other support materials. Rescue plan funds are for specific general operating costs only. What is the difference between a project-based grant and a general operating grant? The answer is, while rescue plan funds may support work that goes into programmatic activity, these grants are not project-based. In a project-based grant, all of the costs must relate to the execution of a specific project. In an operations-based grant, eligible costs are not tied to a specific project. For example, you may include staff salaries for your curatorial team, as well as artist fees or stipends for teaching artists in your education department, even if these people will not be working together on the same activities. Similarly, fees and stipends for artists and/or contractual personnel must support the services they provide for specific activities as part of organizational operations. And next slide, please. So before we get to your questions, here are just a few things to remember. If you aren't registered with DUNS, SAM, or grants.gov, please get started now. Late applications are not accepted, so be sure that your application is complete and submitted on time. Submit Part 1 well in advance of the August 12th deadline to give yourself ample time to resolve any issues. Likewise, submit all of your Part 2 materials to the applicant portal well in advance of the deadline. The hours of heaviest usage are generally 8 p.m. to 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on the day of the deadline. Avoid using the system at this time if possible. Each year, we have applicants that wait until the last minute and unfortunately run out of time. Next slide, please. So due to the volume of ARP questions, we have set up specific ARP hotlines. Please use this contact information if you have any additional questions. Of course, if you have any questions regarding your FY22 Grants for Arts project applications or thinking about your FY23 application, please reach out to your appropriate specialist. And we'll come back to this slide at the end as well. Next slide, please. So at this point, we have a chance to get to your questions. Please enter them into the Q&A area at the bottom of your screen. I know that there are already many questions inside. And Jenny, if you can come back on as well. And just as a heads up, if for some reason we don't get to your questions, we will send a follow-up email to APAP and NPN with any questions that are in the chat box that we don't have a chance to get to. Okay, so taking a look at the question and answer box, and Jenny, we'll kind of maybe go back and forth, and we can just support each other on this.
Okay.
I see a question. If the focus is on nonprofits new to NEA funding, does that give them priority in the review process? Can organizations who have received funding in the past apply for ARP? So the answer to that question is we are encouraging new applicants to apply to ARP. We are using the criteria of artistic excellence and artistic merit to review all of the applications. So anybody can apply, whether they are a brand new applicant to the National Endowment for the Arts or have applied for many years. Jenny, is there anything you want to add to that?
Nope. I can go on to the next question.
Sounds good.
All right, the next question. Community college arts programs in Illinois are classified as UBUT, independent business units of the college, and need to break even each year. Oops, where'd it go? And fundraise, etc. Are theaters and museums within a college like this associated with government agencies eligible? The answer is yes. Entities within colleges, universities, community college are eligible. Yes.
All right, thanks, Jenny. Let's see here. So for the 3-year arts programmatic history, I believe the instructions ask for an example of one event per year, not an exhaustive list of all your programs. Can you confirm, elaborate? Correct. I think you only need to provide at least one arts program per year. It does not have to be an exhaustive list. And again, we do have some flexibility if for some reason programs were canceled during the pandemic during 2020. So if you have questions about which programs to include, feel free to, you can certainly reach out to the ARP hotlines.
All right, the next question. Under the eligible expenses, can you clarify what the stipulation that staff and contractual personnel may not conduct work independent of the organization receiving funds means? Is that intended to disallow fiscal sponsorship? I think this means that staff and contractors can do other types of work, but that the NEA is disallowing organizations using ARP funds to fund projects not connected to the funding organization. Yes. So I think you're on the right track there. It's about the fees to contractual personnel. They should be used for work that's intended for your organization's operations and not for work outside of your organization. Yes, of course, that individual may also work outside of your organization, but these funds are intended for to contribute to your operations. Do you have anything else to add to that, Brandon?
No, I think just for any of our grant programs, we can't support fiscally sponsored projects anyway. So, and that doesn't change for ARP either. So they all have to be 501c3 or be part of fall under our eligibility requirements to apply. If you request, the questions move here. If you request funding at larger amounts, is it possible that you would be downgraded to a smaller grant amount? For example, if we apply for 100,000, could the review panel deny us 100,000, but instead grant $50,000? So the answer is no. Whatever grant you apply to, whatever amount you apply for, is it's either you will receive that amount or you won't receive any other amount. So that's why there's no easy answer for that one. It's really taking a look at what makes the most sense for your organizational capacity, what makes the most sense for support of your organization. That's unfortunately I wish we had a good algorithm to share with you, but it's really an individual decision for your organization.
All right, next question. What is considered small or medium-sized budgets? Okay, good question. So another thing we don't have like a specific answer for, because small organizations and medium-sized organizations or large organizations, it really depends on a lot of different factors. Those are defined differently depending on where you are, what types of community your organization is in. So, but any size organization is encouraged to apply for the ARP grants, small, medium, large size organizations. And, we don't require matching funds. And the grants, if you're recommended for an award, it can be for a 2-year period. So up to a 2-year period. So depending on what you apply for, what amount, 50,000, 100,000, or 150,000, it may make sense for you to use that for a 1-year period or less even, or stretch it out over a 2-year period, maybe if you're a smaller organization. So it's up to you to kind of figure that out. And also in the organization information section of the application, you can include information about your organization's mission and history, its background, and your organization's budget to kind of contextualize your organization's position.
Thanks, Jenny. So since we can't discuss the project's plan, is there something that you are looking for in the general operating category that would make something seem more urgent to fund? So I think that's a tough one, because we not prioritizing any one category over another. So for your organization, that category might be funding staff salaries. For another organization, the priority might be funding contracted individuals. And for others, it might be facilities costs. So it's really about sharing why those costs are the most important to your organization. It could be that you can share within the narrative, and Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe other costs were supported by other relief funding, so that you don't need those supported in the same way. So those are, it's, I wish, again, there's no, it's going to be different for each organization. So we are open and not prioritizing any one type of request. So just make the case for why that one request is important for your organization.
All right, great. The next question, how is this grant different than the CARES grants? Okay, so in several ways. So our CARES Act grant program was open last year in 2020, and it closed, I don't know, around this time last year, I think. And so a lot of those grants have already been wrapped up, already closed out. Some will be wrapped up soon. So this is a new grant program under the new administration. We've been funded the NEA has been funded at a higher amount to distribute. And CARES Act grants were for a set amount of $50,000 each, if I'm remembering correctly. And these, we have kind of a tiered approach where you can select 50,000, 100,000, or 150,000. There are several similarities as well. Neither grant program required a match, and they're both for general operating support. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Brandon?
The local arts agency category is also new for ARP, which is allowing local art. We've expanded the access to local arts agencies and eligibility for them to apply for sub-granting programs as well. So that, I think before it was much more limited as to who could apply for sub-granting. The question is, would expenses for insurance and workers' comp be eligible? I think so, correct, Jenny?
Those are eligible under fringe benefits for under the salaries and wages section. Yes. So the next question, are religious institutions with significant history of presenting the arts eligible for this grant? Yes, so again, the eligibility criteria is it has to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization, a unit of state or local government, or a federally recognized tribal community or tribe. So as long as you satisfy those requirements, then you're eligible.
If review criteria is based primarily on artistic merit versus need-based, will prior COVID relief funding be weighed in the review process? No, it will not be taken into consideration in the review process. And we have the published guidelines online, so you take a look at those. Those are always really helpful for benchmarks for how the panel will review each application.
All right. Next question. What is the deadline for the second round? We are an L organization. All right, let me make sure I'm getting all the dates correct. So for A through L, organizations A through L, the part 1 deadline is August 12th, and part 2, submitting through the applicant portal, the applicant portal will be open August 19th through 25th. If your organization, just for other people's information, if your organization starts with M through Z, the part 1, it's also due August 12th. That's true for everyone, all organizations. And then for the part 2, for organizations M through Z, that the applicant portal will be open August 27th through September 2nd. And again, all of this is on our website under the application calendar for ARP grants.
Thanks, Jenny. The next question says, what is a focus area that will most appeal to panelists? Well, we're going to, as we mentioned previously, that there is no one priority for what we will fund, whether it's salaries or contracted fees for contracted individuals or facilities costs. So we're going to ensure that our panelists are also trained appropriately to make sure that they're reviewing based upon the published criteria and publishing based upon also the values that we have that we're sharing with you all right now. So there is no one focus area that should appeal to at most to any of the panelists that are reviewing the applications.
All right, next question. Can the programs included in the history, I think you're talking about the programmatic history, be online events that were produced in lieu of live performances? And the answer is yes. Especially, you know, well, yes is the answer, but for, you know, the past year and a half, if you've had programming that has been moved to online programming due to the pandemic, or even canceled programming, reimagined programming, you can include that as long as it's arts programming. You can include that in your arts programming history section. Yes. Next question.
All right, I think I'm going to skip the next one because I think we already answered that one. If a city government classifies its library system and public arts program under the Cultural and Civic Services Department, are both eligible to request their own funding, or will they have to apply together as one department, even if they operate separately? So Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, that like a university, they would have to have worked with us to be identify them as independent components. Is that correct? With their own board, or would they all fall under a single entity or as a city government?
That's a tricky question. I'm not sure I can answer that. I might have to look into that one more, and that our local arts agencies staff might be better at answering that. So we'll check in with them and we can get back with you on that.
Thanks, Jenny. Diane, we'll certainly follow up with you on that question. Will feedback be available for proposals that are not awarded support? So we're not going to have the same type of feedback that we generally provide for grants for arts projects. I think we're going to, similar to a CARES Act, we'll provide some things that we've learned. The challenge is that we likely won't have a grant like this again, so it'll be really tough to provide feedback for future. And just with just the capacity of how many folks that we have anticipate applying, it'll be really tough to answer all of those questions. But I think our one of our agency teams is looking into ways that we can provide guidance for future. And as mentioned before, you know, we're really trying to encourage new applicants, and for folks that, knowing that we can't fund everybody, this is a really great opportunity to start building relationships with folks that if an individual or an organization does not get funded, the initial barrier of even applying to the federal government, getting the sam.gov, applying for grants.gov, or registering for those entities has already been passed. So hopefully we can build upon those relationships for for traditional gap funding in FY23.
All right. Next question. For the 3-year history requirement, we received our 501c3 status in July 2019, but our programmatic history dates back to 2018 with a fiscal sponsor. Could you verify that we can count that period from 2018 as part of our history? Our 990s start in July 2019 only. So yes, you can count. So for the programmatic history section, to show that 3 years of arts programming history requirement, that can be before your organization received 501c3 status. You are required to have the 501c3 status at the time of application, but the programmatic history may have occurred before that. So as long as you can show a programmatic history that dates back to before August 12th, 2018, if you're applying for the grants for organizations, then you'd be eligible.
Thank you. Our organization responds to emergencies and disasters at cultural heritage institutions. Our organization is a 501c3 and staffed by volunteers, and we would like to have funds to pay the travel expenses of responders, to pay for supplies used on site, to give workshops in between disasters, and to publicize our activities and give warnings about dangers such as hurricanes. We do not have an official budget and just need to have funds on hand. Would such a request be eligible for this grant? Olivia, I might be struggling with that one just a little bit. So and Jenny, unless you have an answer for that one,
Well, I do know that travel expenses are unallowable costs for the ARP grants. If you're providing a service to organizations, arts organizations, or organizations that have arts programming, then I think that would be then you'd be eligible. However, yes, certain costs are unallowable, and I know travel expenses are one of those.
Thank you, Jenny. So does the implementation timeline for local arts agency grantees also begin January 1st, 2022? At what point might organizations be on the lookout for funding opportunities from LAAs? I think it is also January 1st. But I think similar to state arts agencies, it's probably different for what they make available will likely be different. So you'll want to take a look and see and just check in on their calendars and announcements. But that could be something that we can get back to you if we don't have a chance to.
Oh, actually, I just see here that the earliest project start date is actually December 1st, 2021
Great.
For local arts agencies.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Next question. If we converted a grant to cover general admin in this year, would my organization still be eligible? So generally speaking, yes, you would just have to make sure that there's no overlap between the costs of the two budgets, because we cannot pay for the same activities or the same costs twice.
Great. Let's see here. Can we expect a notification of award, or when can we expect the notification of awards, and what is the payment schedule? Single payment versus multiple payments, etc. Jenny, I'm going to pass that one over to you.
Sure. So you will be notified in December of this year, December 2021. The earliest start dates for organizations is January 1st, 2022. And at that point, once you receive your official award notification, you can make payment requests. And though you can make a payment request in any increment that you want. So it can be the entire grant amount, or you can make smaller payment requests over the period of the grant.
Great, thank you, Jenny. And then, is it possible to see a sample of the in-depth application? You can certainly go to the grants or the arts.gov website and go to the ARP section. We do have both part 1 and part 2 information that you can take a look at, and you can get ahead of schedule, particularly with part 2 that has the narrative, questions, and budgets, and download those questions ahead of time and get those ready. In fact, we highly encourage you to have those questions ready before the deadline period and the application period is open.
Yeah, look under how to apply under at arts.gov under the ARP opportunity, and you'll see instructions for part 1 and part 2. Under part 2, there's a link to a PDF that includes all of the application questions. All right, next question. Can multiple units within a state university apply, and do they have any effect on each other's chances? So yes, it is possible for multiple units within a university to apply. However, they have to first be approved, vetted and approved by NEA staff as independent components of that university. That's the only way that smaller entities within a larger institution can all apply. So if some units within universities have already been vetted and approved by the NEA, so you would just need to contact NEA staff to check in on that and make sure that you're eligible.
Thanks, Jenny. And I'm just taking a quick look in the chat section. There was a question about what type of situations would exist for an organization to submit a request for a 2-year period versus a 1-year period. For example, would it be to present a bigger budget number so we might be eligible for a higher award? That doesn't necessarily change. That doesn't change your eligibility for a higher award. It really, again, it's one of those situations where it has to do with the needs of your organization, whether it makes more sense to spread the funding out over 2 years. We have that option as well for our grants for arts projects as well, that organizations can apply for up to 2 years of programming. So that does, and even with our grants for arts projects programming, the grant amounts range from 10,000 to 100,000. So that is really just up to your discretion as an organization and what makes sense for your own budget. Jenny, anything to add to that?
Yeah, not really. You'll have in the application, you'll enter the dates. It's called the period of performance, the project start and end dates. And you can request any period up to 2 years. So it can be smaller than a year even. Some just request a couple of months, but up to 2 years.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm looking through the chat section and trying to skip some of the ones that questions we've already answered. Would creating a new position in our organization be eligible for support from ARP grant? And yes, it would. You can fund current positions. You can use the funding to create a new position, and you can use the funding to support staff that have been laid off or furloughed in the past 1.5 years as well. So all of that is eligible. I think we may have hit the end. Let's see here. Actually, there's one more question. For part 2 on the GAF, I've seen there are character limits for the different sections. Do you know if there is a specific point font size we should use? 11 or 12? I imagine I will be copying and pasting text.
So I think in the grant application form in the applicant portal, there's only, you use, the font is just one type. There's no choices. And in terms of copying and pasting, yes, you can do that, but we recommend that you do it in, if you're copying and pasting into the grant application form, you are copying it from a text-only program, not Word, because there can be some hidden characters, sometimes hyperlinks and things, hidden characters are in there. So just make sure that it's copying over correctly.
Yeah, programs such as like Notes or something, it helps eliminate some of the coding that word processing programs carry with them. I think we've may have reached the end of our questions. I think there were a couple that we had that we needed to follow back up on, and Caitlin, I think, will send us the transcript of all of the questions in both the chat and the Q&A, so we can review those and get back to folks. Let's see here. So I think if it's possible to maybe put back the slide with the contact information. That's great. So this is contact information for our presenting and multidisciplinary works staff. I want to highlight that we have a new specialist that just started this week, Katrina Carter. As you can see, Jenny Turman responds if your organization has a name that starts with A through E. Jenny Turman will be your primary contact for your GAP applications. If you have an organization that has a title that begins with F through Z, Katrina Carter will be your primary specialist for those questions. However, we also have really wonderful staff that are managing the hotlines and emails for ARP. So go to them first for ARP. And if you have questions about GAP, certainly come to us. I just want to take this minute to thank Caitlin Strokosh from National Performance Network and Caitlin Zachary from APAP for hosting this really lovely webinar. We appreciate the time that you gave us to share this information. I, again, want to stress that we are doing everything we can to be available and accessible for this grant application, and not just for ARP, but also for GAP. So we really, especially because we're encouraging first-time applicants, we want you to know that there are faces here and people here behind the phones and emails. Don't be afraid to reach out to us if you have any questions. We want to hear from you, and we want to help support you in the potential success for receiving a grant at the NEA. So with that, thank you again. And Caitlin, are there any final words or information that you wanted to share?
Sure. Thank you, Brandon and Jenny. We obviously want to thank you, the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Performance Network. Thank you to our attendees for joining us. You will be able to access this recording on the APAP website soon. And be sure to check the APAP website for all of our upcoming programs and events. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again soon.